Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Hunters, Season 2, Episode 5. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode. Lonnie and Mindy are taking Roxy to the hospital. And obviously we learned a little bit more about Roxy's past. We learned about hers. It didn't come up at all during season 1 about her having a sister, and we kind of learned about she was probably already about this fight, as her dad kind of talked about, like, she would always make every calls out there in the world her calls. And so she's trying to help her sister who was wrongfully put in jail, and she kind of had a plan about it, but luckily it went sideways, but her dad was luckily able to get her out of there. And it is this conflict between both of them are trying to do everything they can for her sister. But for him, it's like, I know what happened to your sister is wrong, but I'm not about to let you end up in jail just, alongside of her, especially because you got a little girl to look after. And both of them are coming at it from different perspectives, because he's trying to do everything from the legal route, which she's like, that's not enough, which is very beautiful and contrary to in parallel with everything that, eventually her joining the Hunters. And I think that ends up being that interesting thing of eventually how Meyer was able to convince her, because, hey, this is for the greater good. We're killing Nazis, the most evil in the world. Like, who can't get behind that cause, especially as a black woman, is like, you are just as high on the Nazi list as anyone else, So it is that situation of making the world a better place has always been something that's always been intrinsic to Roxy, apparently. And so for her, it's just, in her mind, it's like, I'm making this world a better place. I'm trying to fight to make this world a better place for my daughter. But he's like, the fact of the matter is, you've always been that. You want to make every cause your own. But that little girl, because for her, it's like, that little girl is my cause, is Roxy's perspective. But her dad's perspective is, sweetheart, you are her world. You want to make the world a better place? Well, you are her world. If anything ever happens to you, and she's like, nothing ever will. But it's like, that little girl's world will be destroyed and devastated if anything ever happens to you. So, don't go out there fighting these fights like this. Luckily, you didn't have a weapon on you. You were smart enough not to have a weapon on you, or this would have gotten a lot worse. But don't take those chances. And it's like, here she is getting dragged further and further into this fight. She walked away, but still came back last season. And now here she is, potentially dying. And her dad was worried. He's like, hopefully one day you'll find the answer. But he's like, I'm scared that by the time you come to realize it, it will be too late. And here she is, bullet, in her, potentially have struck like an artery or something. And Lonnie's even pleading to the guy. It's like, hey, do whatever you need to. He's like, we're not equipped to really handle this. He's like, do whatever you need to. She has a daughter she needs to get back to. So hopefully everything works out on that front. And kind of, since we're in that conversation, it is sad because obviously Joe cares a lot about Roxy, and it's not his fault. I mean, he hesitated, so there was a part of him still there, but he still pulled the trigger regardless. I mean, it could have been a headshot like it was with George, but it wasn't. So it is a situation of what do I do? I hurt the person that he obviously has feelings for, and that's a whole complicated thing we'll kind of get into later on when we talk about Joe and everything on that side of the episode. But other than that, we had the Meyer flashbacks. I thought it was an interesting conversation he had with Roof. Roof's like, oh man, your person was able to get all this information. I was like, once again, I'm like, those are the files you got from Victor Fronheim, aren't they? It has to be, right? Because I was about to say, how else would you get? I mean, yes, he has the money, position, and resources to do that, but I'm also like, this probably has to be just based on that, because maybe he figured, once again, I do believe he only kept those records just on the off chance, I need to know who else is here, just to know who maybe to avoid and see whether or not they have any information on me. And then Ruth just happens to show up at that time talking about the Nazi that she recognized. So he's going to Germany to look for a Nazi hunter, Thomas, and I was like, that guy must end up dead for him not to be a part of the team. Interesting, it's same as, was it Dever, that actor? He's Detective Ryan from Castle's kind of the best thing I know of him. And he was a Trigon in Titans. He was in something recently, and I can't think of it off the top of my... He was a bad guy in something recently, and I don't remember what. It might have been an episode of Leverage this season. Leverage Redemption. It might have been that, or I don't remember. Like I said, I don't remember off the top of my head now. Either way, putting tangents and all that aside, Meyer ended up, because he is in Germany, he went to his family shop and met his niece and also his sister. And because also when he got the ribs, she's like, "Oh, this is pork." I was like, "Don't, isn't it kind of?" Which I was always, I mean, he was kind of making excuses, but that's why he also hesitated, because I was like, "They don't eat pork, right? Like the food needs to be kosher, right? Like Jewish people do not eat pork." Maybe I'm mistaken on that. I think that was also kind of like what that line of dialogue is supposed to be. It's like, but he's making an exception just because it's like, well, it's his sister, and he's kind of, well, I am in Germany, and I just do want to probably help support the family business a little bit. It's interesting too, because she got into it a little bit about their family situation, and that is his parents died, and the way he was talking about, I was like, oh, they died after you became Meyer, after you left. And so he found out, like, oh, it's like, oh, did they die in the war? It's like, no, dad died from a heart attack and mom died from a broken heart. It's like, oh yeah, that's usually what happens when like one person in a couple who's been together for so long dies, the other person just dies out of loneliness. It's like, no, he died from a broken heart about my brother. Now I'm curious, is that a broken heart because, hey, your brother died and he meant the world to her, which still could be. And she's like, yeah, I idolized my brother until I found out what he was. And it's like, yeah. It's like, it's sad your brother's like right in front of you. You could tell there's something there where she almost sees it, she almost feels it, but she doesn't say anything. But it's like, yeah, also knowing like, right, your sister kind of looks down upon you. Like, she still loves you, but it's still the complicated thing of loving you, knowing what you are. Because I think sometimes that's something that isn't always talked about. Like, not everyone in Germany supported. I'm sure, I'm not trying to equate the two situations. They're terrible points in history, but like slavery, like I'm sure there are like 90% of people agree with slavery just because a lot of people grew up in it. It's like that's all they ever knew. So when you're kind of raised in that environment, you're not always going to steer away from your family. But that's why I'm like, that's a little different, because some of those people during that time grew, like some people just accepted because that's the way society is. They, it's the same way with Hitler. Like he fed on, like there was some underlining stuff inside of people that Hitler like he added fuel to that fire. Maybe there was some underlining stuff of that hate, and it's just like, yeah, like I mean, especially because he was able to spread his ideology by being like, oh, all your issues, it's this particular group's fault. It's all of them. Look at them, this, and this, and that's how and once again, it's just, this show is so, sadly, because that conversation, it's never a conversation that goes away. Anti-Semitism sadly never goes away, just like racism hasn't gone away in general, but it's just like, just the timing of all of this too, in a time where it's just like, yeah, anti-Semitism been on the rise, and it's just like, it's that same like fervent conversations that led to things like the Holocaust happened in the first place. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but it's just like, yeah, not everyone supported that. And even his sister was like, my brother was a monster doing that to people, so she didn't support it, because I think there's a little bit of a difference. It's like, right, she didn't like, Hitler's regime was able to kind of like fever pitch up like a lot of hate in people, but like that hate, I mean, maybe there were underlining elements of that hate prior to Hitler's reign, and he was able to just kind of like sow the seeds of that a little bit. But it's like, it's a situation of like, my point is, it's interesting because I feel like I don't always think about that sometimes. I'm like, yeah, not everyone in Germany supported like Hitler's thing, but it's not much you can do considering there were so many people backing him, and he kind of rose to power in a position. So there was like not sadly much that, your voice could outweigh that to some. I don't know. I don't know enough about Germany's history during that time to really kind of, I have like the U.S. perspective to some extent, historically speaking. But even then, like my history, my knowledge of history is very limited. But either way, before I went on that whole tangent, he went to visit his mother's grave, and the guy Tomas like found him, and it's just like, no, you messed up, because Jewish people don't leave flowers on the grave, they leave stones. I was like, is that real? I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I had never known that to be a thing. Maybe it's been in stuff before and I've just never noticed that. But I never knew that. It's like, yeah, I mean, and the sentiment behind it makes so much sense too. A flower, it eventually withers and you have to replace it, a stone will last forever. It's supposed to be just kind of like the memory of someone. I was like, the sentiment behind that is like so beautiful. I was like, oh, I really like that. I feel like a stone is, I mean, you know, obviously it's like outside of that, like flowers is just kind of the go-to, but I never thought of like the stone perspective like that. I thought that was so interesting. But yeah, he saw through Meyer. He knew exactly who he was, because it's like, yeah, you would leave flowers on the grave of the mother of the guy who did terrible stuff to you and your people. You in particular, Meyer, because people know your connection to the wolf. Sadly, Tommaso's too good at what he did and ended up killing him. It's like, yes, that I figured as much. And I was like, yeah, that's because I was like, yeah, he never joined the team. It's like Meyer had to kill him. So it's like, interesting. Once again, giving all this background and story to Meyer while he was working with Ruth, which while I skipped over it, but I love that line where he was like, oh yeah, make yourself at home. And she's like, I will not mistake this for my home, Meyer. Do not mistake me. Like, just because I am here, don't mistake him. Like, cause he's like trying to make it like, oh, like comfortable home, like almost like we could pick up where we start. It's like, no, things are different. We are different. The fact is I am here because of this mission. Like, don't get it twisted type of situation. And she stumbles upon his safe. Now this is all making me go like, wait, did Ruth ultimately find out Meyer's truth? But maybe it was too late before she could act upon it, or maybe she had inklings to it. Because like I said, the guy that Jonah brought to him in season 1 at the end, in the finale, that, you know, he was like, oh, this is the wolf. And the guy's like, no, this is the wolf. That guy, the dermatologist or a doctor or surgeon, whatever, that guy, right? Ruth was going to visit him, but we don't know if Ruth actually did. She probably didn't before, but it's probably because she was already suspicious to some extent. But to be fair, like, we have no idea how, like, the team hasn't even fully formed yet. So Ruth probably didn't figure things out till like the very end, probably a little bit before she died, but she didn't have any proof, you know? So she probably had inklings later on that like there's something up with Meyer. He's got some secrets, because like there's like a safe in his room, in one of his rooms, that she ended up seeing. So those were some interesting developments on that front. But maybe moving into the main line of things, after everything went down at the hotel, Jonah's all about like, no, we got to go. You know, George is dead. We got to go get Clara. It was Joe. Travis is here. So the team is ready to go. But Hava is like, no, we can't. This is about finding Hitler. This is about millions above one. But for him, it's like this, you know, she's family. She's like, I'm your only family. But for Harriet, and I love this scene of her being like, you speak of family, George just died. And what were the first words out of her mouth? Oh, he should have been more careful. You put it on him. Like, no one could have seen that coming, because that could have easily been any one of you. Besides, he was out with Lonnie and Roxy like you asked him to. But I guess you're like, right, with me, you should have been more careful. You should have, you know, it's like, you couldn't come. You were blindsided by that. All of you were. But for her, it's like, you act like he stayed by your side despite everyone being gone, even referencing Zev. I thought Zev was dead. Zev left. But we later on hear from Hava, like, she pushed him away. She pushed him away because, hey, he chose me before the mission. The mission is all that matters. So we got to find Hitler. She spent so long on this mission. So she must have found out, because I think she said they're like wanting this like a 30-year-long mission. So I don't know if that's supposed to just be in the grand scheme of things, since like World War II ended and the Nazis, those that weren't killed, hid themselves out and around the world. So there's that. Or whether it's specifically hunting Hitler that's been the 30-year mission. I mean, it kind of all comes together, because like taking off the head of the serpent, you know, it's kind of like the ultimate goal. And Hydra would be even more apt word to say specifically, because, well, you know, the Hydra is the one with the multiple heads, but also like that ends up being like, you know, symbolic with the Marvel, because Marvel used the Hydra as a representation of Nazis. It was started by Nazis, but tangent and all that aside, it's like, yeah, George stayed by your side, and what is he like? Kind of like shit on like he shit on the bottom of your shoe. And the fact of the matter is, it's like, no, you know, we are going to save that girl. Like, she comes first and foremost. And I think that's because Harriet has always done what Hava's wanted her, but she's like, yes, you may be more cold-blooded than me, but in this moment, I'm going to do this, because it's like, right, he called you Ima, me mother. And I still call you that, but it's like, you are wrong in this situation. And obviously, very, very Meyer-esque of her saying, oh, you're all cowards. Your Safa would be disappointed in you, Jonah, and so would your father. It's like, no, neither one of them would be, because her choosing like one life that matters, like her father would be proud of her making that choice of yeah, taking down Hitler's one thing, but it's like, yeah, we're also, if you're not willing to stake it like one life, like every life matters, even if it's just one, but especially in this case, an innocent woman is mixed up in all of this. And Ruth would never be disappointed in Jonah doing this for someone he loves. She would want him to fight for love instead of just revenge. She doesn't want revenge and darkness to define his life. She wanted love and light. So that was interesting on that front. But they locked and loaded, and they ended up tracking down the van in the small town. And Harriet and Millie had a really beautiful scene where obviously Millie's nearby a church, because it's like, oh, the town's quiet. It's like, yeah, everyone's at church, and it's just a reminder of what she did. And she opened up to Harriet about what she did, and she's like, what I did was a bad thing. It's like, how could what you did was a sin? What you did was for my father, and it was for me. Like, all the people, like, that guy wasn't a pastor, he was a Nazi. Like, you did the world good. It's like, Millie, you're not going to hell, but she's like, I did. It's like, no, like, the fact is, all it takes is one great deed to outweigh all the bad. And she's like, taking down Hitler. That's her main reason why going with Jonah, because they both want to outweigh the death and destruction that they've caused and all the bad they've done. They want to outweigh it by, if they take down Hitler, like, it balances the scales to some extent. But I love Harriet saying, like, you're not going to hell. You don't get to see, like, you never got to see as much of that sentimental side of Harriet, but I think that's also showcasing, like, how much of an influence this team has had on her. Like, she doesn't just have Hava speaking in her ears anymore. I think Harriet is kind of, there's a little bit of who she was before, a little bit of that Rebecca still inside of her, and I think an example of that would be, like, I mean, we don't know if she still ended up killing him or whether she did spare him, but the guy who actually killed her father, like, at least in the episode, she didn't kill him. So I think, like, it's showcasing, like I said, that more sentimental side to her, and Millie kiss. And I was like, not just once, twice too. I was like, that, it's these traumatic situations that bring people together. And also I was like, I'm happy for both of them, because, like, Millie kind of has no one right now, and neither does Harriet. And if you're able to find love during in all this darkness, kind of like Jonah, then, it's all worth it to some extent, that you don't have to go through any of this alone. It's beautiful. And even later on when they're in the car, them touching, like, hands together, I was like, I really like that. I hope that ends up happening. And, I hope that kind of ends up being something that both of them make it out of this. And then you have Hava telling Jonah that he doesn't really love her. He thinks he does, but it's like, if you really loved her, you would have let her go. You would have never gotten involved with her. You would have let her go long ago, because loving someone is letting them go, protecting them. It's like, well, it's easy for her to say that because she's done it twice. She did it with Zeb, but she also did it with Ruth. And it's like, you're only saying it, honestly, because it's your only way to justify it, and your only way to kind of live with the fact is that all these years you never reached out to your sister, and now she's gone, and you can never get any of that back. All those decades you were hoping maybe at the end, when it was all said and done, you could track her down and finally, but it's like, no, you don't have that opportunity. That's also why Jonah's so important to you, because he is kind of that surrogate opportunity for you. So I think that's kind of it. I think she's saying that not only to convince Jonah, but on some level still trying to convince herself by saying it over and over and over again. So, and ultimately they end up finding out because Travis gave them a tip about where to go. Like, obviously this whole thing was a trap, but the flower led them to, like, a flower shop, and ultimately they found out where to go. At the same time, Clara is being held by Travis and Joe. And she's trying to, like, get Joe talking, because by being like, hey, by making it more personable, like, oh, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, who are you, where are you from? She's like, oh, I've always wanted to go to America. And she's like, oh, she's like, do you know how to surf? He was like, no. She's like, oh, I just assume everyone, I don't know why I think everyone in America knows how to surf. But she was able to, little by little, kind of creep a little bit more and more into Joe's head and kind of rein him back in. Which is interesting too, timing wise, because we had the conversation between Hitler and Ava. Like, he's all about like, okay, let's drop some bombs on some very key locations. And she's like, you do that, everyone's going to descend upon us and we won't get a second chance. She's trying to be more tactical about it, but he's like, don't talk to me about it. You had an opportunity. I gave you all this time. I gave you the manpower. I gave you the money. I gave you millions in an opportunity, and you failed in America. So it's up to me. He's like, you were brought to your knees, and this next line, what you became famous for. You know, it's that interesting parallel of like, in his mind, it's like, he's got such an inflated ego, like, I am the God in this situation. You worship me. Because she worshipped him at one point in time until she saw him for kind of the weak, pathetic person he was. And that's why she's like, no, I'm the one that should be leading the charge in this. Even your right-hand person who sees you for who you are is now dead. We'll get to that later on. But, him saying that line of like, yeah, the thing you became famous for was being on your knees. You're like, hey, yo, whoa, talking all kinds of spicy. And it's like, yeah, I think it's just, well, because I think at the very least, while she was in America, she got to run things the way she wanted to. So she got to be away from him and kind of take all that power. But now she's forced to be back here by his side, kind of playing second fiddle to him. But she's like, here you are, like aimlessly shooting at these like fake birds or whatever, and then he like hits her with the butt of the gun. You're like, Jesus. And it's just kind of like a know your place, don't talk to me like I'm your Führer type of thing. I'm your Lord, I'm your God. So sadly she's alone in all of this. But I also say sadly, but it's like, no, who cares? It's Ava Braun, it's the wife of Hitler. Like, you get no sympathy from me in this regard, because you know, in this you are hateful and just as corrupt and terrible as he is. Like, you know, I can't easily see her eventually killing him and taking the reins of everything. But back at the situation with Travis, the trap was set. Luckily, well, she wasn't ever going to get too far, but luckily the team shows up before Travis could do anything to Clara, turns into a shooting gallery, and just like bullets are flying everywhere. I was scared, like legitimately for Millie the most. I was like, oh, please don't let Millie get killed. Please, 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 please. Her and Harriet just had like a sweet moment. Please don't let this go down that way. They end up killing most of everybody, and it comes down to Joe, Clara, and Travis, and Travis is telling them all to put their guns down, but Hava's like, all right, when we get the opportunity to take the shot, but Jonah's like, don't. And all of this is kind of triggering from Joe, because like there are little bits of him kind of peeking through. Like, obviously we're getting flashbacks, more and more flashbacks of like the torture he went through, like Hitler breaking his mind and turning him into a soldier. And in that moment, I was like, you're going to do it, aren't you? And he ultimately ends up putting Travis down, which I'm like, oh man, I wish that bastard got like, for one, I wish Jonah would have been able to do it, but it's almost perfect that Jonah didn't, that it needed to be Joe. But it's also like, yeah, the bastard should have been put down like he was. But it's just also because he acts like he's so, just like, oh, you hate him so much. But it's like, yeah, like he thought he was special, and it's like, well, he was to Eva, but he's gone now. And what did she tell you? Watch your back around Joe. And I think that was, foreshadowing all of this. But yeah. They're asking, like, what happened to you, Joe? And he's like, I don't know. It's like, is Roxy dead? And they're like, we don't know. Maybe. And so he can point them towards Hitler now, which Hava's happy, because I was like, oh, so actually saving this girl was worth it in the end, because now we have a direct line on knowing where Hitler is. And obviously, Jonah's got to deal with the aftermath of, like, what are you going to do with Clara? She now knows the truth about you, knows that a lot about you is a lie, plus you kill people, Nazis or not. The fact is, you are a murderer, so... is there any repairing that? Does he have to do what Hava says and just let her go? Is that doing right by her? Because her being connected to you will continue to put her in danger. It's like, probably in his mind, it's like, well, once you take down Hitler, it's okay. But it's like, is there any going back for her? There might not be. It's just like, I'm going to go on with my life. I can't be with you, Jonah. So we'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.